Just after sunrise on January 22, 1943, the jungle west of Point Cruz felt deceptively calm. The air was already thick with humidity, the kind that clung to skin and soaked uniforms before the day truly began. In the broken remains of a Japanese bunker captured days earlier, a young American officer pressed himself into the dirt and shadows. Second Lieutenant John George did not move. He did not rush. He did not fidget. He watched. George was 27 years old, an Illinois native with a quiet demeanor and an unusual reputation. To most of the men around him, he was an oddity, an officer who trusted a civilian hunting rifle more than the standard-issue weapon carried by everyone else. For weeks, fellow officers had mocked the rifle slung over his shoulder, a bolt-action Winchester Model 70 fitted with a low-powered scope. They called it a toy. Some joked that it belonged on a deer stand back home, not in the middle of a Pacific battlefield. Yet here George was, crouched among sandbags and shattered timber, watching a massive banyan tree roughly 240 yards away. He peered through his scope with patient concentration. This was not his first hour of waiting. He had been there since before dawn, long before most of the battalion stirred. The stakes were high. In the previous 3 days alone, Japanese snipers operating in the coastal groves near Point Cruz had killed 14 American soldiers. They struck from trees, from shadows, from places that seemed impossible to detect. One man had been shot while filling his canteen. Another died while walking a trail he had already passed twice. Fear spread quietly through the regiment, not panic, but the heavy awareness that death could come from above at any moment. The battalion commander had finally reached a breaking point. Malaria was bad enough. Losing men to unseen rifle fire was worse. The commander needed someone who could hunt the hunters. He needed someone who could shoot with precision and patience. That was when John George's name came up. George's background was unusual for an infantry officer. Before the war, he had been a competitive marksman, winning the Illinois State Championship at long range while still in his early 20s. He understood wind, breathing, trigger control. He understood how small movements translated into inches at hundreds of yards. But none of that mattered to skeptical officers who believed only in regulation equipment and doctrine. When George unpacked his rifle months earlier at a stateside training camp, even the armorer had questioned it. Was it meant for hunting animals or enemy soldiers? George had answered calmly. It was meant to kill Japanese soldiers who were killing Americans. The rifle had arrived late. While George crossed the Pacific with his unit, the Winchesters sat in a warehouse back in Illinois. He watched other men clean their garrons aboard ship while he waited and hoped his weapon would catch up. Weeks later, just before Christmas of 1942, a supply sergeant handed him a wooden crate stamped with a single word, fragile. Inside was the rifle he had saved years of National Guard pay to buy. He cleaned it carefully, checked the scope mounts, and ignored the jokes. By late December, the 132nd Infantry Regiment had replaced exhausted Marine units on Guadalcanal. The Marines had fought for months to hold Henderson Field, but the jungle west of the Mechanical River remained dangerous. Japanese soldiers, pushed back from earlier positions, melted into the trees and terrain. Some of them stayed behind deliberately, trained marksmen assigned to slow American movement and inflict casualties. The fighting at Mount Austin had been brutal. Weeks of combat, dozens killed, hundreds wounded. When that battle finally ended, George had not fired a single shot in combat. His rifle remained clean, untested. Point Cruz was different. There were no concrete bunkers or obvious fortifications. Just towering trees, tangled roots, and men who understood how to disappear inside them. The banyan trees were especially dangerous. Some stretched nearly 90 feet high, their thick trunks splitting into massive branches that could hide a man all day long. On the night of January 21st, the battalion commander called George in. The conversation was short. The snipers had to be stopped. The commander wanted proof that George's rifle, and George himself, could deliver results. George explained his credentials without exaggeration. He spoke of measured groups, of controlled fire, of knowing when not to shoot. By morning, he would prove it or be sent back to carrying a standard rifle like everyone else. George spent the night preparing. He stripped the Winchester, cleaned away the heavy protective grease from its ocean journey, checked the smoothness of the bolt. He inspected the scope, adjusted the mounts, and laid out his ammunition, standard military cartridges, the same caliber fired by the Garand. He slept little. At first light, he moved alone into the ruins of a captured bunker overlooking the groves. He carried no radio, no spotter, no escort. Just his rifle, water, and ammunition. He settled in and began watching. The jungle was alive with noise. Insects, birds, distant artillery. George filtered it all out. He watched for movement that didn't belong. Leaves shifting without wind. Branches bending under unnatural weight. At 9:17 a.m. he saw it. A slight movement high in a banyan tree. He waited. It moved again. Through the scope, the shape resolved into a man crouched among branches, watching a supply trail. The Japanese sniper was facing away from George, unaware he had been found. George adjusted slightly for wind. He slowed his breathing. The trigger broke cleanly. The rifle recoiled, and nearly a quarter-mile away, the sniper jerked and fell. His body tumbled through branches and struck the ground hard at the base of the tree. George worked the bolt and stayed focused. Snipers rarely worked alone. If there was one, there would be another nearby watching. He searched patiently. At 9:43, he found the second sniper in a different tree. Lower this time. The man was climbing down, retreating after hearing the first shot. George led the movement and fired. The second body fell backward through the leaves. 2 shots. 2 kills. George did not celebrate. He waited. Later that morning, a bullet slammed into the sandbags inches from his head, spraying dirt into his face. George rolled away from the firing position and pressed against the bunker wall. He waited several minutes before carefully peeking back out. The shooter had revealed himself briefly. George searched methodically and found the third sniper still in the same tree he had fired from. A fatal mistake. George fired once. The man fell. By noon, 5 Japanese snipers were dead. Word spread quickly through the battalion. The joke stopped. Men who had mocked the rifle now whispered about it. George ignored them all. The Japanese adapted. Movement ceased during daylight hours. George spent the afternoon watching empty trees. The next day brought rain, heavy, tropical rain that masked sound and movement. When visibility returned, the snipers tried again, climbing trees while the downpour hid them. George spotted them one by one. Shot by shot, he dismantled their positions. When Japanese mortars began walking rounds toward his bunker, George relocated just in time, diving for cover as explosions erased his previous position. He kept hunting. By the end of January 23rd, 8 snipers were dead. Only 3 remained. And those 3 would be the most careful. George barely slept that night. He changed positions before dawn, choosing ground the enemy would not expect. He watched patiently, aware that now the remaining snipers were hunting him just as much as he hunted them. What followed on January 24th was a deadly chess match played across jungle terrain. Decoys. Overlapping fields of fire. Baited positions meant to draw George into exposing himself. He saw through them, waited longer, watched harder. When the final sniper team attempted a coordinated trap using ground movement instead of trees, George stayed submerged in a shell crater filled with water, holding his rifle above the surface. He waited until both men turned away, then rose silently and fired twice in quick succession. 11 snipers were dead. But the danger was not over. Japanese infantry moved in to recover bodies. George found himself outnumbered, nearly surrounded. He fought his way out, using precision shots and movement rather than volume of fire. When he finally reached American lines, he had only 2 rounds left. The Point Cruz groves fell silent. The sniper threat was gone. George's actions changed doctrine. Officers who had dismissed him now listened. He was ordered to train others. Using captured and surplus-scoped rifles, he built a sniper section from expert marksmen and taught them what paper targets never could: patience, concealment, restraint. In the weeks that followed, his teams eliminated dozens of enemy soldiers without suffering losses of their own. When George was eventually wounded and evacuated, the campaign on Guadalcanal was nearing its end. His war did not end there. He would carry his rifle into Burma with Merrill's Marauders, adapt it for long patrols, and use it sparingly but decisively. After the war, George returned home, educated himself, and lived a life far removed from jungle combat. He never sought attention. He never glorified what he had done. He simply recorded it, clinically, so that the lessons would not be lost. That record became a book, Shots Fired in Anger, a work respected not for drama, but for truth. John George lived to see sniping become formalized, respected, institutionalized. He saw the kind of work he once did alone become the foundation for modern doctrine. When he died in 2009, his rifle went to a museum. It sits quietly behind glass. Most visitors pass without noticing. But that rifle once changed the outcome of a battlefield, not through volume, not through technology, but through skill, patience, and one man who trusted his training when others laughed. And because stories like this matter, because history remembers only what we repeat, you are here listening now, helping keep it alive.